The fall to a forgotten world. The silence of space shattered like glass. Commander Ethan Grayson's knuckles turned white as his hands gripped the failing control stick. The sleek exploration ship, Odyssey, jolted violently under an invisible force. Warning sirens screamed in protest while red lights bathed the cockpit in a chaotic glow. The words on the navigation panel flickered ominously. Uncharted gravitational anomaly detected. Grayson cursed under his breath. Where the hell did that come from? The ship buckled again, like a giant fist had grabbed it mid-flight. Systems shorted out in quick succession. Shields gone, thrusters sputtering, emergency protocols failing. He barely had time to initiate a distress beacon before the ship plunged downward. Through the viewport, a swirling violet atmosphere swallowed everything. The fall was merciless. Grayson braced as the Odyssey plummeted through the sky, flames licking at its hull. Metal screamed. The force threw him against his seat as darkness clawed at the edge of his vision. Then, impact. The sound of tearing steel roared in his ears, followed by a sickening quiet. When Grayson came to, he tasted blood. Smoke choked the cabin, and the acrid sting of burning electronics clung to his senses. Slowly, painfully, he unclasped the harness and fell forward, landing on one knee with a groan. His body ached, ribs bruised from the crash. The cockpit was in shambles. Cracks spiderwebbed across the viewport, and sparks popped from broken panels. Grayson wiped sweat and soot from his forehead, muttering to himself, "Not the smoothest landing, Grayson." He reached for his survival kit, pulling it free with a grunt. Inside were only the essentials: rations, a thermal blanket, flares, and a laser knife. Slinging the pack over his shoulder, he pushed the emergency hatch release. The door hissed before breaking free with a loud snap, and icy alien air flooded in. What awaited outside stole the breath from his lungs. The landscape stretched endlessly. An alien forest bathed in twilight. Towering trees loomed above him, their bark a shimmering silver, their leaves pulsating faintly with a bioluminescent glow. Strange orbs of light floated through the air like lazy fireflies, and sounds echoed all around. Distant chirps, howls, and the rustling of unseen predators. Grayson exhaled sharply, his breath misting in the cold air. Well, that's new. Suddenly, he froze. A deep growl rumbled to his left. Slowly, he turned his head. The creature stepped forward, a hulking beast, its muscular form covered in dark, bristling fur that shimmered faintly under the strange light. Its eyes glowed an unsettling blue as it fixed Grayson with a predatory stare. Its claws, each one as long as a dagger, scraped against the ground. Grayson's heart pounded. Of course, there's a monster. He reached for his laser knife, the blade humming faintly as it extended. He didn't want to fight, but the creature was advancing. Its growl deepened, saliva dripping from its fangs. Grayson tightened his grip, bracing himself. And then, like lightning, something flashed between them. A figure leaped from the shadows. A tall woman, impossibly fast and graceful. Her form was otherworldly, her skin the color of midnight with a faint silvery glow. Her long hair, iridescent and flowing like silk, rippled as she landed. In one hand, she held a staff, a weapon that pulsed with blue light. The beast snarled at her sudden appearance, but the woman slammed the base of her staff into the ground. A wave of energy erupted outward, rippling through the air. The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing, before it backed away into the shadows, disappearing entirely. For a moment, there was silence. Grayson blinked, lowering his knife as the woman turned to face him. Her features were sharp, alien yet strikingly beautiful, with piercing eyes that shimmered like stars. She regarded him with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "You shouldn't be here, human," she said, her voice smooth but edged with cold authority. To Grayson's surprise, her words were perfectly translated by the earpiece embedded in his ear. He cleared his throat, struggling to find his voice. "Yeah, well, It wasn't exactly my first choice to crash land here. Her gaze narrowed, and she crossed her arms. You've disrupted the harmony of this place. It will not go unnoticed. Grayson straightened, frowning. Noticed by who? Before she could answer, a distant, guttural howl echoed across the landscape. The woman's expression hardened, and she turned abruptly. There isn't time. Follow me if you want to live. Wait, what? Grayson protested as she strode off into the alien forest without another word. After a moment of hesitation, he sighed, jogging to catch up. This day just keeps getting better. The forest was alive, almost sentient. The trees groaned softly as if watching them, and strange creatures flitted through the underbrush. Grayson tried not to think about the glowing eyes he occasionally saw peering at them from the shadows. The woman moved with confident precision, weaving through the terrain effortlessly. Grayson, on the other hand, stumbled over roots and cursed under his breath. Finally, after what felt like hours, she led him to a cave entrance, hidden beneath a massive, overhanging root. Bioluminescent moss lined the walls, casting the interior in a faint green glow. The temperature inside was far colder, and Grayson shivered involuntarily. The woman turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Stay here. I will check the perimeter." Before he could respond, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone in the strange cavern. Grayson dropped his pack and sat heavily against the wall, letting out a long breath. His muscles ached, his mind swirled with questions, and fatigue was setting in fast. "What the hell is this place?" he muttered to himself, staring at the faintly glowing walls. The woman returned minutes later, her sharp eyes scanning him briefly. "It's clear for now." Grayson looked up. "You know, you still haven't told me your name." For a moment, she was silent, her gaze unreadable. Then she finally spoke. "My name is Kaleri." "Kaleri," Grayson repeated, testing the word. "Well, I'm Commander Ethan Grayson. Thanks for, saving me." Kaleri didn't respond. Instead, she crouched near the center of the cave and produced a small device. A faint flame burst to life, crackling softly and casting dancing shadows along the walls. Grayson let the warmth wash over him, pulling the thermal blanket from his pack. "You're cold," Kaleri observed, her tone matter-of-fact. "I'll manage," Grayson replied, though his teeth chattered slightly. Kaleri stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. "That blanket is useless here." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "You got something better?" She met his gaze with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "On this world, survival requires warmth. If you freeze, you die." Grayson frowned. "Okay, so, what do you suggest?" Kaleri's expression remained steady, her voice unwavering as she replied. "We share body heat." Grayson blinked. For a moment, he wasn't sure he'd heard her correctly. "Wait, what?" Kaleri's eyes narrowed. "If you wish to survive the night, you'll need me, or you can die here alone. Your choice." Grayson stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or take her deadly seriously. Something told him this was only the beginning of a very long, strange journey. Whispers of the unknown. The small flame crackled softly in the cave, its warmth barely enough to fend off the creeping chill that seemed to settle deep in Ethan Grayson's bones. He stared at Kaleri, her alien silhouette still and calm in the flickering light, as though the biting cold was merely an afterthought for her. "Body heat, huh?" Ethan muttered, his voice skeptical but laced with exhaustion. "You really don't believe in personal space, do you?" Kaleri's piercing gaze met his. "Survival requires practicality, not sentiment." Ethan sighed and leaned his head against the cave wall, trying to process everything. Moments ago, he'd been in the cockpit of his exploration vessel. Now he was stranded on a hostile alien planet, sharing a fire and a survival strategy, with a woman who looked as though she'd walked straight out of a myth. "Fine," he finally muttered. "You win. Let's do this before I turn into an ice cube." Kaleri said nothing as she shifted closer to him. The strange, silvery glow of her skin reflected the firelight as she settled beside him, her movements graceful but deliberate. Ethan tensed slightly as she leaned against him, the warmth of her presence chasing away the cold that had crept into his limbs. For a moment, the silence stretched uncomfortably. "You're stiff," Kaleri remarked, her tone sharp but observant. "Your kind is so easily unsettled." "Excuse me," Ethan shot back, his voice rising defensively. "Not exactly a normal situation for me, you know. I didn't exactly plan on crash landing into your backyard." Kaleri's lips curled faintly, though it was hard to tell if it was amusement or disdain. "You humans are always so confident until the universe reminds you how small you truly are." Ethan glanced at her, brow furrowing. "What do you know about humans?" She didn't answer immediately, instead watching the fire with an expression he couldn't quite read, somewhere between sorrow and resolve. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, almost as though she were choosing her words carefully. "Your kind ventures far into the void with machines and arrogance, always believing you're prepared. Yet when you fall, you are as fragile as any other." She paused, her gaze lifting to meet his. "I have seen your kind before." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Wait, you've met humans." "Not met," Kaleri clarified. "Encountered. Observed. Those who came here before you did not survive the night." Her words landed like a punch to the gut, and Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Others? How long ago?" Kaleri shook her head, the iridescent strands of her hair catching the light like liquid metal. "Time is irrelevant here. The world does not measure its days as you do." Ethan leaned back, trying to wrap his mind around her words. He stared into the fire, his thoughts spinning. Others had been here before him, humans, yet none had survived. His stomach churned as a heavy realization settled over him. "What makes me think I'll be any different?" The silence between them stretched, broken only by the occasional crackle of the flame and the faint whistle of wind outside. Ethan glanced at Kaleri again. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. Her words, her calm, the way she moved with such purpose. "You're not just some local, are you?" he said, narrowing his gaze. "You've been out there, haven't you? Off this planet." Kaleri's expression hardened slightly. "That is not your concern." "Yeah, but it's hard not to be curious when someone shows up swinging magic staffs and saving the day," Ethan retorted, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You know, some answers would go a long way to convincing me I'm not losing my mind." Kaleri sighed, as though weary of the conversation. "I do not owe you explanations, human. Your survival is your concern, not mine." Ethan snorted, shaking his head. "You keep saying that, but you're still here, aren't you? You could have left me to die back there." Kaleri didn't respond, her gaze flickering toward the cave entrance where shadows danced against the walls. After a moment, she rose fluidly to her feet, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond. Ethan tensed. "What is it?" "Quiet," she hissed, holding up her hand. Her posture stiffened, her muscles coiled like a predator ready to pounce. Ethan grabbed his laser knife instinctively, every nerve on edge. From the entrance, a low, unnatural sound echoed into the cave. A chittering noise, faint but growing louder. Ethan's pulse quickened. It didn't sound like the creature from before. This was something worse. Kaleri turned to him, her voice firm and urgent. "Stay here. Do not move." "What? Wait, you're going out there?" Ethan blurted out, rising to his feet. Kaleri shot him a sharp look. "You will only get in my way." Before he could protest further, she stepped into the darkness and disappeared. The sound grew louder, like countless sharp claws skittering across stone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and his grip on the knife tightened. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Just leave me here. Alone. Perfect plan." Seconds turned to minutes. The sound drew closer, and the temperature in the cave dropped even further. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. He glanced toward the entrance, half expecting something monstrous to crawl through. Suddenly, Kaylari reappeared, her face shadowed but intense. "We need to move. Now." "What? Why?" Ethan demanded, stumbling forward. She didn't answer, instead grabbing his arm and pulling him with surprising strength. "They've found us. We cannot stay here." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who's they?" Kaylari glanced at him, her expression grim. "The true predators of this world. The ones who hunt the weak." Without another word, she dragged him from the cave and into the eerie, glowing forest. Behind them, the chittering sound swelled, growing louder, closer, and far more menacing. Ethan's mind screamed at him to run, but his body was already moving, Kaylari leading him deeper into the unknown. As they weaved through the alien terrain, the darkness pressed in, and for the first time, Ethan felt like a rabbit fleeing from a wolf. But as he glanced at Kaylari, her face a mask of resolve, her weapon aglow, one thought burned in his mind. "Whatever those things are, I'll face them, but I'm not dying here. Not tonight." The hunters of the Hollow Night. The alien forest was alive in a way Ethan Grayson had never experienced. Trees pulsed faintly, their bioluminescent veins glowing brighter with each step, as though the very ground beneath him was responding to his movements. The air grew thick with the sounds of chittering, unsettling, sharp, and hungry. "Faster," Kaylari ordered, her voice sharp as a blade, her glowing staff illuminating their path. Ethan pushed his legs harder, his boots pounding against the spongy alien earth. The survival pack on his shoulder jostled uncomfortably, but he refused to let it slow him down. Somewhere behind them, the noise swelled, a skittering like countless claws dragging themselves through the underbrush. "Kaylari," he panted, "what are those things?" Kaylari didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept the forest ahead, and her grip on the staff tightened. "They are hollow stalkers," she said finally, her tone low and grim. "Predators of the dark. They move in swarms, drawn to sound, heat, and the scent of fear." Ethan shot her a look. "That's comforting." She ignored his sarcasm, stopping suddenly and grabbing his arm. "Quiet." Ethan froze mid-step, his heart hammering in his chest. The chittering grew faint, distant, but it hadn't stopped. Kaylari knelt and pressed her hand against the ground, her face set with focus. "They're circling," she whispered, rising to her feet. "We can't outrun them. We need to disappear." Ethan frowned. "Disappear? How?" Kaylari pointed to the base of a massive tree nearby, its roots gnarled and twisting into a hollow opening. "There." Ethan hesitated. "You want us to crawl in there? What if something else is already inside?" Kaylari turned to him, her glowing eyes sharp. "Would you prefer the stalkers find you first?" Ethan groaned under his breath. "Fine. You win." Again. Together, they hurried toward the hollow. Kaylari knelt and slipped inside effortlessly, her slender form vanishing into the darkness. Ethan grunted as he squeezed in after her, the survival pack snagging briefly on the roots. Once inside, Kaylari turned and pulled him further back, into a larger chamber that smelled faintly of damp earth and alien flora. The hollow was cramped but hidden. Bioluminescent moss clung to the roots, offering faint illumination as they settled in the shadows. Kaylari held a single finger to her lips, motioning for silence. Ethan obeyed, struggling to calm his breathing. Outside, the chittering sound grew deafening. Ethan swallowed hard. The noise was closer than ever, echoing through the forest like nails scratching against glass. Shapes flickered through the gaps in the roots. Dark, insectoid shadows moving in an unsettling rhythm. Hollow stalkers. Ethan's pulse pounded as he caught glimpses of them. They were skeletal in form, their elongated limbs tipped with curved claws. Their eyeless heads turned, scanning, listening for anything alive. Kaylari stayed perfectly still, her eyes locked on the entrance. One of the creatures approached, its spindly clawed feet scraping against the ground as it stopped just outside the hollow. Ethan bit the inside of his cheek to stop himself from gasping as the creature tilted its head, listening. Seconds stretched into eternity as the stalker lingered, its sharp claws tapping against the roots. Tap, tap, tap. It knows we're here, Ethan thought, sweat dripping down his neck. Suddenly, another chittering call echoed from deeper in the forest. The creature froze, then turned sharply and skittered away, its movements unnaturally fast. The sounds of the swarm began to fade, the stalkers moving as one towards some unseen disturbance. Only when silence returned did Ethan finally exhale. "That was too close," he whispered. Kaylari remained focused, still listening for any lingering threat. After several long moments, she relaxed and sat back. "They've moved on. For now." Ethan leaned against the roots, running a hand through his damp hair. "I'm starting to think you're enjoying how close I keep getting to death." Kaylari didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "You don't understand the stakes here, human. This world, it does not tolerate weakness. Survival is not a guarantee." Ethan frowned, his frustration boiling over. "I get it, okay. I'm a fragile, reckless human, but I'm still here. And I'm not planning on dying anytime soon." Kaylari's expression softened slightly, though it was fleeting. "Your kind always speaks of plans. This planet, Xerinth, has a way of shattering them." "Xerinth?" Ethan repeated, his brow furrowing. "That's the name of this place." Kaylari nodded. "Once it was something more. Now it is forgotten. A hollow world, crawling with remnants of its past." Ethan studied her carefully, the puzzle pieces in his mind slowly fitting together. "You speak like you know this place's history. Like you've been here before." Kaylari's gaze flickered, her stoic mask cracking ever so slightly. "I have been here longer than you can imagine, Ethan Grayson." Ethan's curiosity burned brighter. "So you're not just some traveler, are you? What's your story? Why are you here?" Kaylari looked away, the weight of his question hanging between them. "My story does not matter. Yours, however, has only begun." Before Ethan could press her further, the faint sound of distant howls echoed once more, sending a chill down his spine. Kaylari rose to her feet, staff in hand, her expression grim. "We need to keep moving," she said firmly. "The stalkers are persistent. We must find higher ground before nightfall." Ethan sighed and grabbed his pack, rising to his feet. "Great. More running. At this rate, I'm gonna set a personal record." Kaylari ignored his sarcasm as she led the way out of the hollow and back into the alien wilderness. The twilight glow of Xerinth dimmed further, the shadows stretching longer with every passing minute. Ethan followed her, his mind spinning with questions. Who was Kaylari, really? What had happened to this world to turn it into such a dangerous, forgotten place? And why did she seem so certain that his story mattered? The wind howled faintly, carrying whispers of the unknown through the forest. Whatever lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready. But he'd survive. He had to. The secrets beneath the stone. The wind had changed. Ethan Grayson felt it first as a sharp chill crept into the alien forest, cutting through the bioluminescent trees like an unseen blade. Kaylari paused ahead of him, her glowing staff humming faintly, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. "Something's wrong," Ethan murmured, gripping his laser knife tightly. Kaylari tilted her head as though listening to something he couldn't hear. "The air is heavier. The hollow stalkers are not the only danger stirring." Ethan swallowed hard. "Great, just what we needed. More monsters." Kaylari shot him a look that silenced his sarcasm, and without another word, she turned and led him deeper into the forest. The terrain grew steeper, the ground turning rocky and uneven beneath their feet. Ethan stumbled more than once, cursing the weight of his survival pack and the lingering exhaustion from the crash. "Where are we going?" he asked, breathing hard. "To safety," Kaleri replied curtly. You keep saying that, Ethan snapped, but nothing on this planet screams safe to me. Kaleri ignored him, pressing on. After another agonizing climb, they emerged onto a narrow ridge. Ethan stopped to catch his breath and took in the view below. The forest stretched endlessly, its bioluminescent glow flickering like waves beneath the darkening sky. But something else caught his eye, a massive structure half hidden by the mist. It jutted out from the forest like the broken rib of a long-dead beast. Its surface was dark, ancient, and unmistakably artificial. What is that? Ethan whispered. Kaleri didn't answer immediately. Her gaze lingered on the structure, and for the first time since they'd met, Ethan saw hesitation in her expression. It is what remains, she said finally, of those who came before. Ethan frowned. Before? You mean other humans? Kaleri turned to him, her voice heavy. No, not humans. Others far older, far greater than your kind. Her words sent a chill through him. He glanced back at the structure, his mind racing. Far older, that could mean anything. Whatever had built that ruin clearly wasn't human, but it left a question Ethan didn't want to ask out loud. What happened to them? Kaleri's jaw tightened. They fell to their own creations. Ethan blinked. Their creations. Xerinth is not a world of natural death, Ethan Grayson. Kaleri replied, her voice quieter now. It is a graveyard of forgotten power, and the echoes of that power still linger. Ethan shivered despite himself, the ridge wind biting at his skin. You're talking in riddles again. Why don't you just tell me what we're walking into? Kaleri fixed him with a sharp look, because some answers are more dangerous than the questions. Before Ethan could press further, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. Rocks tumbled from the ridge, clattering into the mist below. Ethan staggered, his heart leaping into his throat. Earthquake? He asked, panic creeping into his voice. Kaleri's expression darkened. No, something is waking. The ridge beneath their feet trembled again, this time accompanied by a distant, guttural roar that vibrated in Ethan's chest. He turned to Kaleri, eyes wide. I'm gonna need you to be more specific. Kaleri stepped forward, her staff glowing brighter as she scanned the horizon. We have no time. We must reach the structure before it finds us. Ethan's stomach dropped. Kaleri didn't answer. She simply grabbed his arm and pulled him along the ridge, her movements quick and deliberate. Ethan stumbled after her, adrenaline numbing the ache in his legs as the rumbling grew louder. Whatever was waking was massive. The very air seemed to vibrate with its presence. The climb toward the structure was grueling, but they made it. Ethan stumbled into the shadow of the ancient ruin, his breath ragged as he stared up at the towering remnants of alien architecture. Up close, the surface of the structure looked unnatural. Dark stone carved with faint, glowing symbols that pulsed like veins beneath skin. Where the hell are we? Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Kaleri. Kaleri knelt near an opening at the base of the ruin, her fingers tracing the edges of an alien door embedded in the stone. A place your kind was never meant to see. Ethan glanced nervously over his shoulder, the rumble growing louder. Whatever was approaching was close now. The forest beyond the ridge swayed violently, the bioluminescent glow flickering like lights before a storm. You better tell me you've got a way in, Ethan said, stepping toward her. Kaleri didn't respond, her focus fixed on the door as she pressed her glowing staff against its surface. The runes flared brighter, a low hum reverberating through the air. Then, with a deep groan, the door shuddered and slid open. Ethan didn't hesitate. Go. They slipped inside just as a thunderous roar split the air. Ethan turned for a brief glimpse of what was emerging from the forest. His blood ran cold. The creature was gargantuan, an amalgamation of shadow and steel, its many limbs tipped with razored edges that gleamed in the dim light. Its eyeless head swiveled as it let out another roar, the sound vibrating through Ethan's bones. Move, Grayson, Kaleri snapped, pulling him deeper into the ruin. Ethan stumbled after her, the door groaning shut behind them. For a moment, darkness consumed them. Then the walls began to glow faintly, the alien symbols lighting up like pathways. Ethan exhaled shakily, his heart hammering in his chest. That thing. What is it? Hilary's expression was grim as she turned to him. The hollow stalkers are only scavengers, Ethan. That? She paused, her voice low. That is a guardian, one of the last remnants of this world's ancient defenses. Ethan's mouth went dry. And it was guarding this place. Yes, Hilary said quietly, because what lies within these walls was never meant to be disturbed. Ethan stared at her, dread twisting in his stomach. Then why the hell are we here? Hilary met his gaze, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Because it's the only way you'll survive. Ethan took a shaky breath, his mind swirling with questions. Whatever answers this ruin held, they came with a cost. And as the Guardian's distant roars echoed faintly through the stone walls, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking deeper into a trap. But he had no choice. The ruins that breathe. The air inside the ruins felt alive. Ethan could feel it. Each breath seemed heavier, like the walls themselves exhaled faintly in rhythm with his own. The faint blue glow of the alien symbols spread across the stone, flickering as though responding to their presence. Hilary moved ahead of him, her staff casting longer shadows against the ground. Ethan followed, his fingers brushing the cool walls as they walked deeper into the massive structure. You said this place wasn't meant to be disturbed, Ethan muttered, his voice bouncing faintly in the cavernous corridor. So why are we walking straight into the heart of it? Hilary didn't slow her pace, her gaze fixed forward. Because survival is more important than obedience to the past. Ethan frowned. Whose past? Yours? This planet's. Hilary stopped abruptly and turned to face him. The glow of the walls reflected off her silver-toned skin, making her look even more otherworldly than before. This place. This was built by a race that played with forces beyond their understanding. When they lost control, Xerinth turned against them. It became a graveyard for their ambition. Ethan swallowed hard. And the Guardian out there. That was part of their experiment. Hilary nodded slowly. Guardians were their tools. Protectors at first, destroyers in the end. Now they wander the forests, mindless and enraged, defending ruins their creators no longer inhabit. Ethan glanced down the corridor ahead, his gut twisting. Then what's left in here? What could possibly be worth the risk? Hilary's sharp gaze pierced through him. Answers. And a weapon. A weapon. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. Against what? Hilary turned away again, continuing down the path. Everything. Ethan let out a shaky breath and followed her. His instincts screamed at him that this was a bad idea, but what choice did he have? Between the hollow stalkers outside and the monstrous Guardian, the ruins felt like their only refuge. But something wasn't right. The deeper they moved, the stronger Ethan's unease grew. The walls weren't just glowing anymore. The symbols shifted. They flowed like liquid, pulsing softly, almost like veins filled with light. He glanced nervously at Hilary. Is this normal? He asked, pointing at the undulating walls. Hilary didn't turn her head. The ruins are responding to us. They can sense life. The energy within them still lingers, and they are aware. Ethan stopped mid-step. Aware? Hilary turned, her face unreadable. Do not stop moving, Grayson. They are watching us. Hose. Before he could finish, the walls around them suddenly dimmed, as though something enormous had taken a breath and exhaled. A low, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating deep in Ethan's chest. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was alive, like the growl of some unseen beast. Hilary. Ethan whispered, his voice shaky. What the hell was that? Hilary's jaw clenched. The ruins are testing us. It is their nature to know who enters their halls. Ethan blinked, not understanding. Testing us for what? to determine if we are worthy of what lies within. Before Ethan could respond, a sudden clang echoed down the corridor, the sound of heavy stone shifting, followed by a sharp metallic hiss. Ethan spun, his heart leaping into his throat. "Did you hear that?" Kalari didn't answer. Her gaze was locked ahead, her grip tightening on the glowing staff. Ethan turned to follow her line of sight and froze. The corridor ahead had transformed. The smooth stone now bristled with jagged, shifting lines, like a maze made of teeth, and in the darkness beyond, faint lights flickered, moving. No, not lights. Eyes. "It's awake," Kalari whispered. Ethan took a step back. "What's awake?" Before she could answer, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Ethan stumbled as a deafening roar split the air, vibrating through his bones. A massive shape emerged from the darkness, something vast and mechanical, yet alive. Its surface glimmered with shifting symbols, its elongated body twisting unnaturally as it scraped along the walls. A sentinel. The creature's many limbs unfolded with slow, deliberate precision, each tipped with sharp metallic blades. Its head tilted toward them, rows of glowing eyes blinking to life in sequence. The hum in the air grew louder as the beast let out another sound, a hollow mechanical wail that rattled Ethan's skull. "Run!" Kalari shouted, pulling him toward a side passage. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He bolted after her, his heart pounding like a war drum. Behind them, the sentinel's limbs scraped against the walls, the sound like nails on glass. Its glow grew brighter, illuminating the passage as it pursued them relentlessly. "Why is it chasing us?" Ethan shouted. Kalari glanced back, her expression strained. "It senses we are trespassers. It was made to destroy all who enter uninvited. Then how do we stop it?" Kalari didn't answer. Instead, she veered sharply into another corridor, dragging Ethan through a narrow opening in the wall. They emerged into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in shadow. In the center, a massive pedestal rose from the ground, glowing with brilliant white light. Kalari pointed, the heart of the ruin. Ethan squinted, breathless. "The what?" Kalari turned to him, urgency etched across her face. "The core of the ruin's power. It is the only thing that can stop the sentinel." Another roar echoed behind them, shaking the chamber. The sentinel was closing in, its massive form scraping through the stone as it followed. Ethan looked at Kalari. "What do we do?" Kalari strode toward the pedestal, raising her staff. "We awaken it before the sentinel reaches us." "And if we fail?" Kalari glanced at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "Then we die." Ethan let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Fantastic. Let's save the day, then." Kalari placed her staff onto the pedestal, and the chamber erupted with light. Symbols flashed across the walls, brighter and faster, as though the entire ruin was waking up. The hum grew deafening, vibrating the ground beneath their feet. The sentinel emerged into the chamber, its mechanical roar echoing as it advanced. Its limbs shot forward, blades slicing the air. And then, the pedestal exploded with light. The force threw Ethan backward, his vision going white. For a brief moment, he felt weightless, suspended in the heart of something vast and unknowable. And then everything went silent. Ethan's eyes flickered open. The chamber was still. The sentinel lay motionless, its glowing eyes dimmed. The pedestal's light had faded, leaving only a faint hum in the air. Kalari knelt nearby, her staff glowing faintly. She looked up at Ethan, her expression both wary and satisfied. "You did well, Grayson," she said softly. Ethan pushed himself up, his head pounding. "What just happened?" Kalari rose to her feet. "The ruins accepted us, for now." Ethan groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, I think I'm starting to hate this place." Kalari offered the faintest of smiles. "Then you are beginning to understand it." As Ethan looked around the chamber, he realized something terrifying. They were still only at the beginning. The ruins had given them a reprieve. But the secrets of Zerinth were far from over. The voices in the dark. Ethan Grayson sat slumped against the pedestal, his breathing shallow as the echoes of the sentinel's final roar faded into oblivion. The massive mechanical beast lay in pieces across the chamber, its lifeless limbs splayed like a spider crushed underfoot. The once glowing runes on its surface flickered, then died, leaving nothing but an eerie silence behind. Across from him, Kaleri leaned on her staff, her normally stoic expression showing the faintest glimmer of exhaustion. For the first time since their escape began, she seemed mortal, fallible. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the ruins still alive around them. "Is this what victory feels like?" Ethan muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Because I don't feel very victorious." Kaleri tilted her head, her silver-toned skin glinting faintly in the low light. "Victory is survival, Grayson. Do not take it for granted." Ethan gave her a dry laugh. "Survival? Sure. But for how long? Every time I think I've caught my breath, this planet throws something worse at me." Kaleri approached him, kneeling slightly. Her gaze, for once, wasn't sharp or cold. It was searching. "Do you feel it?" Ethan frowned. "Feel what?" She gestured to the chamber. "The ruins have awakened. You must sense it by now." Ethan hesitated. Now that she mentioned it, he did feel something. A faint pressure in the back of his mind. It was subtle, like whispers carried on a breeze, just outside of hearing. He shivered and sat up straighter, his muscles still aching. "What is that?" Kaleri's expression darkened. The voices of the ruins. The echoes of those who came before. Now that the core has accepted us, it has begun to share its secrets. Ethan blinked. "The ruins are talking to us." "Not talking," Kaleri corrected, rising to her feet. "They are remembering." Before Ethan could question her further, the chamber shuddered beneath their feet. The pedestal at the room's center pulsed faintly, its once brilliant light now flickering like a dying star. The whispers in Ethan's mind grew louder, more insistent, like countless voices vying for his attention. Ethan staggered to his feet, clutching his head. What the hell is happening? Kaleri turned sharply, her staff glowing brighter as the runes on the walls began shifting again. This time faster, their light twisting like ink swirling in water. "The ruins are searching you, testing you." Ethan's head throbbed. "Me? Why me? I didn't sign up for this." "You activated the core," Kaleri snapped. "It has marked you now. You are part of this place." The whispers became clearer now. Strange, overlapping voices, speaking in a language Ethan couldn't understand. But he felt their meaning, their intent. Warnings, memories, regrets. It was as though the ruins were alive, feeding him pieces of a puzzle he hadn't asked for. Suddenly, the ground in the center of the chamber began to split apart. Ethan stumbled backward as a massive fissure formed, releasing a plume of glowing mist that poured upward like a rising fog. The voices grew louder, and from within the mist, a figure began to take shape. Ethan froze, his throat dry. "What is that?" Kaleri stepped in front of him protectively, her staff humming with power. A guardian of the core, a memory given form. The figure solidified, its form shifting between human and something far more alien. Its skin gleamed like liquid metal, and its eyes, dark voids rimmed with light, fixed on Ethan with a chilling familiarity. When it spoke, its voice echoed through the chamber, layered and hollow. "You do not belong here." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Oh, that's comforting." Kaleri didn't move, her expression unyielding as she faced the figure. "He was chosen by the core. He has earned his place." The figure's head tilted, as though considering her words. Its voice resonated once more. "He bears no legacy. He is an outsider." Ethan looked at Kaleri, panic bubbling in his chest. What is it talking about? What does it mean, no legacy? Kaleri ignored him, her focus on the shimmering figure. "You will not judge him. He is not of this world." All who enter Zerinth are of Zerinth, the figure intoned, its form flickering slightly. The choice is no longer his. Ethan felt a chill ripple through his body as the figure turned its void-like gaze to him. Suddenly, his mind was flooded with visions, blinding, searing images of civilizations rising and falling, great towers collapsing into dust, and vast machines tearing through landscapes that once thrived with life. The ruins, he realized, were all that remained of something vast and ancient, a forgotten war that had torn this world apart. And now, they were speaking to him. Ethan dropped to his knees, gasping. The weight of the knowledge was overwhelming, like the ruins themselves were trying to push their will into him. Grayson. Kayluri's voice cut through the haze. She knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. Focus on me. Focus. Ethan forced himself to look at her, his vision swimming. What do they want from me? Kayluri's expression softened slightly. They want a vessel, a guide. They are choosing you to finish what they began. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. Finish what? Kayluri's gaze hardened. To free this world from the chains it cannot break alone. The shimmering figure raised a hand, and the whispers swelled again, louder and more frenzied. The mist coiled around Ethan, lifting him slightly as the pressure in his mind reached its peak. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might shatter apart completely. Then silence. Ethan fell back to the ground, gasping for air. The mist dissipated, and the figure vanished as though it had never been there. The chamber grew quiet again, its rooms dimming to a faint hum. Kayluri knelt beside him, watching carefully. You have survived their test. Ethan sat up slowly, shaking his head as the echoes of the voices lingered in his mind. What did they do to me? Kayluri offered him a hand. They gave you purpose. Ethan stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. You call that a gift? Kayluri's gaze held his. You may not understand it yet, but Zerinth has chosen you. And in choosing you, it has given you a chance. To do what? Ethan asked quietly, his voice hollow. Kayluri's expression darkened as she looked toward the far end of the chamber, where another path stretched into shadow. To survive what comes next. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, his body aching as though it had been wrung dry. The weight of the ruins' whispers still lingered, but something else had taken root. A purpose, whether he liked it or not. Fine, he muttered, picking up his survival pack. Let's finish this. Kayluri nodded, leading him toward the next passage. But as they stepped into the darkness, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer walking into the unknown. The ruins had already seen his path. And now, so had he.